So it's very important before you go sailing to make sure that your boat is in a good state for going sailing, such as the mast isn't going to fall down, the rudders aren't going to fall off, the hulls aren't going to come apart, no ropes are going to break, that kind of thing. So let's have a look at what pre-flight checks you can do for your boat before going sailing. So what I find is a good idea is to start at one end of the boat and work your way either forwards from the back or backwards from the front. But here we're going to start at the back and work our way forwards. So firstly, we just want to check the rudder system. So the most obvious thing if you're sailing a Hobie is just to check that your cam is in the right position so that your rudders will lock down. Check for excessive play in the rudder system, making sure that these bolts are tightened up sufficiently. Check for how to service your rudders video for these bolts here. But usually these would, once you've tightened these once, you wouldn't need to adjust these again for a while. Absolutely crucial, most important thing, make sure the bungs are in. That should be the first thing you do, the second thing that you do, and the last thing that you do. Also with the rudder system, just check that if your boat should have a split ring in the bottom of the rudder pin and the top of the rudder pin, make sure that those bad boys are intact. Just coming forward slightly, make sure that the joint from the tiller arm to the tiller connecting bar is connected properly on both sides, and check that the joint for the tiller extension is nice and snug. That isn't going to come undone. The ring here is in and in good condition. Then coming forward slightly, we have the main sheet and traveller. So a good idea just to check that you have rigged it correctly, thus, and that the rope is in good condition and it's not going to break, and everything is good there. If you're using a snap shackle, do check out my Amazon store if you want to buy a snap shackle to make rigging your boat faster and more convenient. But if you're using a snap shackle, just check that to make sure that it is working correctly. Then onto the mainsail. Before you put the mainsail up, just check that all the battens are tied in. You don't necessarily have to do this every time, but it is a good idea to check. If you've been sailing every day of the week, perhaps you've got a few minutes spare on the beach, check your battens are tied in correctly. Then moving on, check that your trampoline lacing is tied up. So here we can immediately see, yes, that's fine. Check your trapezes before you go. So we can actually see on this one, this is not rigged correctly. So we can just change this now, where we just need to push the rope through from behind to make sure it's not going to slip. If you're adjusting your trapeze height, then if it is a 16 that you're sailing, make sure you put your jib up first, because otherwise your rig tension won't be on and that will give you a false reading. So there we are. That is now not going to slip, and we can check our trapeze height. For me, 2 fingers between the sidebar and the J&H is good, but if you want less chance of it coming unhooked, have it a bit shorter for a bit more security. You want to check your clevis pins on your shroud adjusters. So if you've got covers like this, you'll just need to pull the cover back, and here we can see we've got them all nicely taped up. We've just done this morning, but if you haven't got them taped up, just check that the split rings are in nicely, and then put a bit of tape on just to ensure they're not going to come out. Also on a 16, where this goes into the hull just here, this can come unscrewed over time just here, so just give it a little test just to make sure that that is tight. That's all it takes, a little test like that. You'll know if it's loose, and then you can just tighten this up by screwing it in. Also with the trapeze, perhaps you had a spectacular pitch pole last time you were out and you forgot that your elastic is broken. So it's worth just pulling a bit through from the other side and you'll soon know if it's broken or not. Or you could just have a look under the boat and replace that if it is broken. With all of your cam cleats on the boat, it is worth checking these to make sure they do spring back. If they don't spring back, first thing to do is just give it a good wash with some fresh water. If it still doesn't spring back, it might mean that the spring is damaged. Now, this isn't absolutely crucial to replace because these will hold even with a broken spring, just with the tension of the rope pulling back. But just note that you've got something to take care of there later. Again, you can find the replacement springs for these in my Amazon storefront. Check the link in the description below. Make sure that your jib halyard is cleated correctly. Here, it's not cleated correctly because it hasn't locked onto itself. So what we need to do is just turn this so it's kind of inside out, and then that means that when we pull that on, it's locked onto itself properly. While we're on the jib, it is a good idea to do up the shackle for the jib sheets with some pliers. Make sure that is tight. And then, like with the stay adjusters for the shrouds, the same on the forestay, make sure that any split rings are taped up so they're definitely not going to come undone. The shackle holding your bridle wires together, you should check that. Perhaps not every time, but if you're sailing when you first go out on your boat for some time, just check that out to make sure that that is tight. If you haven't got a set of fresh wind indicators on your boat, then why not stick some old cassette tape or VHS videotape or whatever you fancy. If you've got some old spinnaker cloth, cut some strips of that, put that on the bridle wires, and then you'll know which way the wind's coming from. If you're sailing a boat which has bow tangs like this, it is worth once in a while, like if you're just going out on your boat for the first time, after a while, just check that these are tight. It's just a 13mm nut underneath and a screw on top. Check that that's tight so that there's no play there. It's a good idea to check that you have got a righting line and it is attached correctly, so if you come to need that, it's going to be there ready for you. If you're sailing a boat which has inspection hatches like this, do make sure your hatches have got a rubber seal on. If you haven't got a rubber seal and you're going out in really light winds, it's not the end of the world. But if you are going out and it's windy, or especially if there's a chance of you capsizing, if you haven't got the rubber seals, your boat will leak if it's on its side or upside down. At the same time, just check the ring for your hatch isn't lifting anywhere. Again, if it's light winds, not such an issue, but it is something that needs to be fastened nicely. Then a good technique for putting these hatches on is actually to screw it while pushing it down the wrong way a little bit. That will engage the thread and then tighten it up from there and make sure that's on nicely. If you've got a spinnaker on your boat and you've got very light winds on the beach, it is worth pulling it up on the beach before you go sailing, just to make sure that it is rigged correctly. If it is windy and you've got a spinnaker on your boat, then just make sure you rig it correctly before going sailing. This is a suggestion from Ronald, one of our regular guests here at Wild Wind, is if you're not very good at tying knots, for your spinnaker, you could just put plastic balls on the end of each rope, and then all you have to do is loop it through, and there it is, secure. If you're sailing a boat which bolts together, such as a Tiger or any F18 or a Pacific, If you're sailing the boat for the first time in a while and you haven't checked for a while, just check that the bolts are tight to make sure your boat isn't going to separate mid-session. And finally, any other shackles on the boat, like on this boat, shackles that are holding the spinnaker blocks on at the base of the shroud, do check these before sailing because they can become loose over time. Yeah, so if you haven't been out on your boat for a while, or if you haven't used your boat for a while, do check the shackle at the top of the rigging, the hounds connection on the mast, to make sure that is tight, and also check the quality of the wires there before you go sailing if you haven't used your boat for a while. So there we go. I think that should do you. So do check things before you go sailing. It could save you a costly or time-consuming experience which you don't want. It's always better to have that peace of mind that your boat is in good condition before you go out sailing. Of course, if anybody has any questions on anything I've raised here, stick it in the comments below and I'll do what I can to answer your questions. Other than that, thanks for watching. I hope this has been helpful. There'll be more coming soon, of course, on Joyrider TV. And thanks to everybody again who's been supporting the channel. If you haven't yet felt that, like you've given back to the channel, check the description below for many different ways. Or if nothing else, just hit the like button. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button as well, because then you'll know when more stuff is coming. Thank you very much.